Choosing the real estate team or brokerage that you're going to hang your license with and work with is honestly one of the biggest decisions that you are going to make as a real estate agent at whatever point you're at in your career. And honestly, it amazes me how most people make their decisions around the brokerage they work at. It is alarming the amount of people that choose the first brokerage they talk to, and it's even more alarming the amount of people that stay at a team or brokerage even though they don't feel like it's the best place for them to grow their business. So in this video, I'm going to break down what I think are the 8 best questions to ask whatever team or brokerage you are interviewing with. I honestly feel like I have a pretty good grasp of this overall just because I personally have interviewed almost every single brokerage possible for my team or to take my team to. And I've chosen to stay with the current brokerage that I'm at for numerous different reasons. So I've talked to a lot of people who are in your shoes, and I've been in your shoes trying to figure out what is the best place to be for you and your business. So the first thing before we dive into the 8 questions is I want to make sure that we make one thing crystal clear is in this industry, there is a huge difference between a team and a brokerage. Now, obviously, everybody's at a brokerage, so I want to make that clear. I'm talking about the business model of the company that you're actually joining. Are they a brokerage model or are they a team model? Now, a brokerage model, for example, I'll say some names that everybody knows the name of: Remax, Keller Williams, Coldwell Banker, so on and so on, Compass, right? Sotheby's. These are all brokerages where they hire individual agents. They have stuff that they offer to their agents, but those agents are really on their own to build their own business. Now, on a team, this is where you're, generally speaking, going to have way more structure, you're going to have way more support. You might have lead generation. You might have things paid for you that brokerages, you're very much on your own paying for everything, right? So that's kind of the difference when I say brokerage or team, that's what I'm talking about. Then you have 2 different types of teams. You have the Rainmaker team, where the team leader is in production. They probably do a ton of business, and they have a team of agents under them, right? It's probably the John Smith team, and John sells 80% of the production, and then they have agents, right? That's the Rainmaker team, as I say. And then you have teams that are teamerages, which is what my company runs like. We're like a brokerage, but we run the team model, if that makes sense. Generally speaking, team leader is not in production here. This is run more like a business, so on and so on. So when I say team or brokerage, those are kind of the 2 different things that I would make sure you're understanding is wherever you're talking to, wherever you're interviewing, what is their business model? Now, let's dive into the 8 questions. Okay, so that leads me to the first question here, which is why is the company in business in the first place? By asking this question, you're really trying to understand why they do what they do. Why did they choose real estate? Why are they in the business? And you should be able to hear if they have a clear mission or vision as far as what they're actually trying to do. Now, a red flag would be if they have absolutely no plan or vision for what the future looks like. It's honestly pretty likely that they're not going to be there in the future. Now, if you're making a decision of where to hang your career and where to build your career, this is a huge red flag. And if they really don't have any answer, if they don't have any real clear reason why they exist in the first place, they're probably just there to make money. And if they don't have a clear vision for the future, there's a pretty good likelihood they're not going to be there in the future. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2 question I would ask is, what is it going to look like in the first 30, 60, 90 days with the company? Now, there's a lot of different things that they can say here. What does the onboarding process look like? How specific is it? If you're a newer agent, is there a mentorship program? What is included in that mentorship program? What is the cadence for meeting? And what you're really trying to understand here is what is the actual cadence of like, how fast are they going to get you out and running? There's a lot of organizations that'll do 2 weeks of boot camp and patch on the back and say good luck. That is most organizations, especially on the broker side. And there's a lot of organizations on the team side that kind of do the opposite. They have 90 days of boot camp, and by the end of 90 days, then you will start trying to sell. And a lot of us don't have, especially if you're new to the business, a lot of people don't have 90 days to just not even try to make money. So you want to make sure you understand what does the first 30, 60, 90 days look like? What are their expectations of you? Or is it more of, 2 weeks of boot camp and they'll patch on the back and hopefully you sell something, right? You want to make sure you understand that. Now, big red flags for number 2 is that it feels like trial by fire in your first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Huge red flag, run for the hills. All right, so question number 3 is going to be, if you have questions, who exactly are you going to go to? Now, there's a lot of different answers there can be. If you're talking to a company that has a mentorship program and you're a newer agent, do you have a dedicated mentor? Is there a sales manager? Are you going directly to the broker? Just understanding who would be like the chain of command as far as if you have questions, where you get support, how do you get support? A lot of the times there are companies that'll have a library of resources that you can go check out. And the big red flag for this question would be if everybody in the entire company goes to one person for questions, and that's the team leader or broker or whatever it is. That's a big red flag because there's a huge bottleneck there at the person in charge. And another red flag along those lines is kind of the opposite of what I just said, but if there's nobody specific to go to, it's like, oh, you can go to any of us for questions. That means there's nobody really designated to helping solve problems for agents. All right, so that was number 3. Number 4 is going to be, what does the meeting or training calendar look like? Is there weekly meetings? Is there monthly meetings? Is there weekly trainings, monthly trainings? Is it on Zoom? Is it in person? Just understanding what they do. I will say one big thing that I have noticed with different teams and brokerages all the way across the country is, generally speaking, the more meetings there are, the more structured the company is. Now, this isn't always true because there's a lot of people that'll just throw meetings on the calendar without a clear vision or goal or why they're doing them. But generally speaking, the most structured teams that I know all have a very clear training calendar. They might meet every single week for a team meeting. We meet every week for a team training. They might meet every week for role play. They might meet for agent like experience level specific things. So you just want to understand, what does the company offer? Is there no training calendar? And this is a big like underline of you get what you pay for here. If you're looking at like brokerages that have incredibly high splits, meaning you keep almost all the money on a deal, don't be surprised if they don't really offer you anything in this circumstance. So understanding what are you trying to accomplish with the team you're joining is also really important to understand. Understanding a company's meeting or training schedule is going to give you a better look into where do they focus their effort. Now, a big red flag here, which I kind of have already said, is if there's no cadence for meetings or trainings or anything, you can pretty much guarantee there's not going to be in the future. And if there is, that means they're probably changing something. So that would be a big red flag for me, is if they really have no structure around any meetings or training. Now, question number 5 is, I think, an interesting one. And I say this because I get asked this question a lot. I like when people ask me this question is, what is the current company size and what's the goal for the future? The reason I think this is a good question to ask is it gives you a good idea of where the company is going in the future. I personally have talked to several different brokerages about potentially taking our team to their company. And if there's no growth path, like if the company itself is not growing, I don't want to join a company that doesn't want to grow. I mean, that just goes against every fiber of my personal being. So I like when people ask this question is, you're going to get a better understanding of, is this company happy where they're at and they don't really want to grow? Or is this company somebody that's a company that's going to continue to grow over time and be able to offer more things or whatever? It's just, I think, a good thing to understand. Now, if you are a person that absolutely hates change, you might not want to grow or join a company that wants to grow, if that's your personality type. I just think this is a good question to ask. I think it gives a very clear indication of how that person answers of the future of that company. If you're a person that doesn't like change, you might not want to grow a company that has plans on growing. Now, I will say on the flip side of that, if a company is not growing, they're shrinking. And if they're shrinking, they're probably going out of business. But that's on the flip side. Now, I will say there's pros and cons to both small and large companies. In brokerages or teams, whatever it might be, there's pros and cons to both. The bigger the company is, generally speaking, the less hands-on support that you're going to get. And the smaller the company, generally more hands-on support that you're going to get. But I will say at a certain company size, the bigger that you get, the company is just able to add more resources than a small company ever would be able to do. And I think that's just something you're going to have to learn and understand, is based on what you're hearing and what you're seeing, is does this company actually offer support depending on their level? Now, here's the red flags for this one. Big companies that seem unorganized, I promise, are chaos. And small companies with no vision are probably not going to be around in the future. Or there's going to be a lot of change in order for them to stay around in the future. That's my general red flags for this question. Now, question number 6, and my pro tip for you here is, please, for the love of God, do not lead with this question. If this is important to you, do not lead with the question when you're asking somebody. It is just infuriating when I get on the phone with somebody that's looking to interview with our company, and the first 2 questions they ask, what's your split and how many leads are you going to give me? If the company has any culture whatsoever, that is the biggest red flag that you will give off. So do not do that as a pro tip. But number 6 is, does this company generate leads? In this industry, we have had a lot of change around lead generation. It is becoming more and more normal. It has become more and more standard for large companies to be able to generate leads for their agents, either on a team level or on an individual level. So there's a couple things you want to make sure you understand. Is one, how are those leads assigned, and where do they come from, and how are they prioritized? Are they spread out evenly throughout all agents, or is there an actual system to feed the best performing agents on the team? I imagine you probably don't want to be the low performing agent on the team or brokerage, so you want to make sure you understand how leads are routed. Also, there's usually different sources. So like, where do the leads come from? For example, if a company has a pond of leads or a pool of leads that are unclaimed that you can call, how many agents have access to that? What are the leads? That'd be one question, but that'd be like on the lower level. The next level would be like a company that runs Facebook or Google ads to a home search website. Above that, you might have things like OpCity, which is people that are actually inquiring to see stuff. This is a huge, in between what I just mentioned, the pond and like Facebook and Google leads, there is a massive jump up to inbound leads from referral partners like OpCity. There's HomeLight. There's a lot of different ones of these. OpCity is a big one. And then kind of the gold standard for the best leads in the business right now that are scalable, that a lot of teams, I shouldn't even say a lot, but a lot of companies can have access to, is the Zillow Flex account. Those are about the highest quality. And then the only thing really above that is like, does the company book leads that they generate for you? And do these not have referral fees attached to it? That is something that very, very, very few teams can actually, I keep saying teams, but you get the point. Very few companies can actually do that because it's incredibly expensive and it's incredibly hard to do. But those are the most valuable leads, even above and beyond the Flex account. Red flag here would just be, honestly, in my opinion, no leads at all. I would say 90% of brokerages, companies out there do not generate any leads for their agents. And I just think that the industry is moving this way. Lead generation is one of the hardest points of the entire business. And if you're working for a company that has none, I just think that is scary for the future. Maybe it doesn't matter to you. Maybe you generate a ton of leads on your own and that's not important to you. That's fine. Just understand that companies that do generate leads for their agents are probably going to be healthier companies in the future. And I'd rather be at a healthier company than a not so healthy company, even if you specifically don't need the leads. And here's a pro tip for you as well too. If you run a team like I do, I've interviewed with almost every brokerage and not a single one of them has had a lead generation source to offer me as a team. If they did, for example, if I was interviewing with a team and they could add a significant percentage to my business with the lead source they had, that would be incredibly valuable. And that's something I think is just lacking completely in this industry on the brokerage level. But that's kind of a side point for team leaders. Okay, now we have gone through 6 major questions so far. Let's get to the 2 probably most important, but I'm putting them last here for one major reason. You do have to ask these questions, and I don't need to tell you that you need to ask these questions. However, asking the questions previously, if you don't like the answers to those questions, the splits and the compensation and what they pay for and what they don't, which is the next 2 questions, do not matter whatsoever. You should not join a company just because of the splits, just because of the compensation. If you do not like the direction the company's going, if you do not like the answers to the questions that we listed above, there's really no reason to join. There's a lot of companies out there. I'd rather you find a company, you like the splits, you like the direction, you like all of that stuff, rather than going just for money. But anyway, number 7 is going to be for you to understand what do they pay for and what do they not pay for. So do they help you with your listings? Do they help you with if you need to stage something? Do they pay for your signs, your business cards, all of that stuff? So what do they offer to pay for versus what are you responsible to pay for is number 7. Now, I think the only real red flag, I suppose, that you could say here is that they don't pay for anything, which frankly, again, here you get what you pay for. Now, my advice is for you to do your own due diligence and figure out, like, is this what they pay for? Like, is this a lot? Is this normal? Is this not a lot? This is where you should talk to multiple places. I probably should have said this in the beginning, but if you're talking to different brokerages, I personally talked to 8 before I made the decision of where I work and the brokerage that I have my team at. So you should talk to at least 2 or 3 so you can get a good bearing and make sure they're similar. If you're going to talk to teams and brokerages, talk to 3 of each so you get a pretty good idea of what is normal for them to pay for and not. All right, number 8, which is the big one. This is the compensation plan. Now, my massive pro tip for you here is for you to use a calculator. I know this might sound difficult, but pulling out the calculator app on your phone is probably going to save you a ton of money here. I'll give you a couple different stories. I personally talk to a lot of different team leaders that are trying to figure out what brokerage to go to, and a lot of agents as well too throughout the company, but specifically for team leaders. And I talked to 2 recently. They were making the decision between traditional brokerage model with no cap and the capping brokerage model with a revenue share option. And when we looked at these two different ones, they were, I would say, 90% of the way, at least I thought they were, 90% of the way decided towards this capping revenue share model. And when we walked through, I said, hey, let's pull out the calculator and let's start doing math, right? What is the total cost going to be? What's the cap? What is the broker split before you cap? What are all the transaction fees, right? What does everything add up to be over here? And then what does it add up to be over here? And it was shocking, both times the math made more sense in the traditional brokerage model versus the capping model over here. And the only reason they didn't realize that ahead of time is because, frankly, they didn't add up what all the transactional fees were. This happens all the time. So my point is, that this is just an example. I'm not saying there's better one way or the other. Is just do the math. If you're looking at a company that pays for all kinds of stuff and they have this comp structure, you want to factor in what it would cost. Versus if you go over here and they don't pay for anything, but they have a higher comp structure, then factor that in, right? That is my overall advice when you're looking at compensation plan, is to pull out your calculator and actually do the math. Don't make emotional decisions around math. The math does not lie. So you want to make sure that that's one thing you're doing. Now, inside of compensation plan, I think this is one, I'll say a pro tip here, and this is something I have learned running my team, is that I really value transparency. So if you are working with a company that they do not have a clear compensation plan or structure, they might just be negotiating, and whatever you negotiate is what you get. And if everybody in the whole company's on that, one, that sounds like absolute chaos, but frankly, that's what most companies are under. So one, that's a little bit scary, but I want you to make sure you understand, if you started today at this number, how do you move up to a higher number? If you can move up to a higher number over a longer period of time. That's one question. Now, also with splits specifically, are there different splits if the company generates leads, if they have leads, versus if you do your own self-generated business, or is it all kind of blended together in one same compensation plan? These are all questions I would want to know. Another thing is fees. Look at this on an annual basis, rather than if they charge monthly fees or if they charge annual fees. Just make sure you do the math, total it up per year, and understand what makes the most sense. I know nobody likes the idea of paying a fee every single month, but paying once a year is really no different. It's just you're paying once a year versus every month, and the numbers are going to probably add up to be about the same. So again, pull out your calculator and make sure you're doing the math there. Now, big red flag here is what I mentioned earlier, is if there's no structure around compensation. If they say, hey, you look like you deserve this split, that would be a huge red flag for me. This is just showing how unorganized the company is. And that's something that I don't think is a good fit overall. A company that's that unorganized, for them, probably the most important thing for their business is their compensation plans with their agents. That would be a huge red flag to me on just how the health of the overall business, if that's how they do it. Again, I value transparency a lot. So if there's no transparency in commission plans and how you move up in the future, that's something I personally don't like at all either. But that, I know that's more personal and emotional, not the logical decision. Again, my big takeaway I hope for you on this one is to use the calculator. And then I added a bonus question in here because I couldn't help myself, but I would ask, what does a perfect agent look like at this company? Now, the reason I love this question, I saved it for a bonus at the end because you made it this far. And if you have, by the way, if you could like the video and share it with a friend, subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. It goes way further than you might imagine. But anyway, if you ask, what does a perfect agent look like for this company? You're going to get probably a very clear answer, I hope. If they don't have a clear answer to that, that's very scary. But you will probably get a very clear answer. Now, for example, if you were interviewing for our company, Onyx Homes, this is the answer I would say, is we look for two major things in an agent. We look for one, somebody who's willing to follow a proven process of how to be successful. Number two is we look for agents who are willing to put in the work that's required to be successful. Those are the two things. Now, here's the reality is if you are an agent and you hear that and you like that, you're going to say, yes, I might be this perfect agent for this company. And that is probably a fantastic fit, assuming you liked everything else you heard earlier in the interview. Now, if you hear that and you want to be left alone and do whatever the heck you want, you are not going to be a good fit for our team. And it's really good to know that by asking this question. So that's why I really like this bonus number 9 question is, what does a perfect real estate agent look like for this company? Because if you tie in, if you feel like you match what they're looking for, you're probably going to be both mutually a much better fit versus if you feel like opposites, you might be like, ooh, you know what, I liked everything that I heard, but if I'm the opposite of what they feel like is a perfect agent, maybe you have that conversation beforehand. I always say this when someone's interviewing at our company, is we want to make sure we're making the right decision just as much as we want to make sure you are making the right decision with whatever brokerage you choose. Got a few takeaways here. Make sure you take the extra time to talk to a bunch of different companies. I think 3 or 4 should be normal, but do some homework as well too. You are making a huge decision. You want to make sure you're making the right one. All right, so those are the 8 questions you should ask if you're interviewing for a new team or brokerage, and I give you that bonus number 9 as well too. Now, if you're watching this video to the end, like I said, like and subscribe, I appreciate it. But if you're watching this video, you might also be interested in another video that I made. I polled all of my audience, both on my team and my audience here on social media, and I found the 10 most common struggles the real estate agents are currently struggling with in this market. So if you want to watch that video, go ahead and click the link, and I will see you in that next one.